Thus, Prime Minister Modi is hosting French President Emmanuel Macron in the pink city of Jaipur. Macron is in Jaipur today, a day before he attends the Republic Day celebrations in the national capital as the chief guest. They held a roadshow a short while ago. They will shortly get down to business as well. There's a bilateral meeting that is slated between the two world leaders. Now, Emmanuel Macron's visit marks the 25th anniversary celebrations of the India-France strategic partnership. Now, France has stood as India's closest friend even when other Western nations like the United States and Canada have tried to peddle the narrative of India being blamed for certain activities there. Remember, only last year, Prime Minister Modi visited France as the chief guest on Bastille Day. He had urged the Indian and French business leaders to work for advancing the friendship between the two sides. That is something that both leaders want to take forward even through this visit. Emmanuel Macron's visit also comes at a crucial juncture. India is emerging as a Vishwamitra, or the friend of the world, and that is why it's extremely significant. What can we expect to come out of this particular meeting? What does it mean for India and France, especially at a time when we see world powers seeing a shift as far as their allegiances go? Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the ORF, joining me on this broadcast. Former Diplomat Veena Sikri also joins us. Veena Sikri, let me get you in first. We're talking about India and France. The relationship between the two countries goes on for decades. We've been natural allies, if you will. How does this visit of Emmanuel Macron to India, to Jaipur specifically, the roadshow that we saw the Prime Minister holding with another global leader, how do you think this fares as far as perhaps opening up a new chapter in ties is concerned?
Well, I think it's a very important strategic partnership between India and France. I think, this is President Macron's third visit to India. So obviously, he has also very heavily invested in this relationship. I think Prime Minister Modi and President Macron are meeting for the fifth time since May of last year. So, I mean, this is like, it shows that they have a lot to do in strengthening this relationship. They're both personally committed to it. I think India and France, it's a cultural civilizational relationship, but in contemporary times, our two countries being so strongly wedded to strategic autonomy, this is a very important factor which brings us together. We are not camp followers. Neither of us are camp followers. We find a lot of things in common between us. I mean, for example, if you see just one factor, India and France, their maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean, where, of course, France has a very big presence, this predates the Quad. So we were already talking, maritime cooperation and carrying it out, and Indian planes were there in the Reunion Islands long before Quad actually took off the ground. So we have a clear understanding of each other's strategic interests, and France wants to make India the key point, the central point of their Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think the defense cooperation is another very important factor. Our defense cooperation, purchase of aircrafts, cooperation on submarines, this is likely to be the biggest outcome of this visit. Maybe a defense industrial work plan, which will strengthen the Make in India, strengthen the Atmanirbharta program of Prime Minister Modi, and maybe a defense space cooperation also. So there's a strong focus on national security, strong focus on understanding each other's strategic interests and cooperating to make them real. So I think that these kind of major agreements, if they come out of the visit, would further deepen this. And I'd like to also mention the International Solar Alliance, where India and France are co-founders and which are equally important for both countries in the energy sector. So we do see that India and France have worked out. We can date back to 1998, where France was one of the few countries where when India went nuclear, they were supportive. They didn't say anything about it, unlike the reaction of so many other countries that we know. And if you look at it, France supporting India on Jammu and Kashmir, France supporting India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council. There are so many landmarks along the way where you can see the evidence of India and France respecting each other, deepening the friendship, and to mutual benefit, working out newer and newer areas of high technology cooperation, because France gives us the technology. There's no hesitation. There's talk now about the Safran engines. So let's see how it all comes out in the visit and the talks which are ongoing right now at the Rambagh Palace.
And the transactional value of the ties, or the transactional part of it is, of course, on one side. But Sushant Sareen, this also is high on symbolism, isn't it? politically also, this is something that the BJP, the Prime Minister would want to try and send a message out to the country as well. We are going into elections very soon. There's this kind of narrative about how majoritarian or how authoritarian this government is. The roadshow there we see, or the bonhomie that we see between the French President and the Indian Prime Minister, France is seen as one of those countries, or Emmanuel Macron himself is seen one of the leaders who is believed to be one of the most liberal leaders, most secular countries as well. That is also something that would be weaved in by the BJP going into election season. Would you agree?
I wouldn't entirely agree with you because simply because, you know, the way I look at it, this has never been an issue either for India or for France. And frankly, these kind of roadshows the Prime Minister has done with, for example, the UAE ruler, the President of the UAE, just recently in Gujarat. You know, so these kind of things have been going on. But I think the relationship between India and France, as Ambassador Sikri very correctly pointed out, it's one of the oldest relationships. In fact, this entire concept of a strategic partnership, France was, in a sense, one of the first countries to enter into this strategic partnership with India. I think we should never lose sight of it. I'm glad Ambassador Sikri mentioned the 1998 nuclear tests which we had done. In fact, out of all the P5 countries, France was the only one which was steadfastly standing with us. The Brits, of course, were notoriously unreliable. The Americans were really cut up with us. The Russians were too weak at that point of time to actually side with us openly. And the Chinese, of course, have always been inimical to us. But the French were the only country which actually stood by us. And in our wars, in peace, the French have always been with us. But I think purely from the point of view of symbolism on the political front, I don't think the Prime Minister really needs, you know, to project a French visit for domestic political audiences. I think domestic political audiences have been fairly impressed with the performance in G20, with the rising stature of India in the world. That in itself is good enough. And I think what happened on January 22nd is like a slam dunk in the views of many people. So I think the importance of this visit is essentially in the kind of strategic messaging which this visit does, the kind of partnership which is getting further strengthened, and the kind of understanding which is there between these two countries. You know, we keep talking about strategic autonomy, Poonam. The French are also a country which is part of NATO, which has been a part of EU, very close allies of the US, and yet I'm not sure if they're still part of NATO, but I'll let that be. But you know, they've kept their strategic autonomy. There are points where they say no to their closest allies, just as we would say no if something doesn't quite work out in our interest. So I think there's a lot of understanding between India and France in that respect also. So to that extent, we are pretty much on the same page on a range of issues, much more than many of the other countries.
Which is also why perhaps we're seeing Emmanuel Macron, when he attends this, the Republic Day parade tomorrow, the celebrations of India's 75 years as a republic. He is going to be the 6th French leader who's going to be a part of these celebrations, the highest for any country. So that's also something symbolically means a lot as far as ties between the two countries are concerned. We're going to be seeing our military might on display tomorrow. Defense as far as between the both countries is concerned, that is also something that we see cooperation in that particular field. When that bilateral meeting ends, we'll get more details of what exactly India and France have gotten down to, but it is down to business now. The Prime Minister hosting the French President in Jaipur today. He's going to be in the national capital tomorrow. There is a lot that comes with this visit, but I thank you both for joining us here on this broadcast and sharing your perspective with us. We'll be keeping an eye out on all of those developments, both in Jaipur and in the national capital here tomorrow. But it brings me to the end of this edition of The Right Stand. Thank you so much for tuning in.